Catherine, I googled recently COVID-19 and mental health, and what came up was an absolute plethora of research papers on what's going to happen, and without going into the academic side at all, what do you think is going to be facing us in the not too distant future?
I think what's going to face us is actually similar to before lockdown. People had really difficult times with relationships, with depression, anxiety. All those things all came into lockdown with us and were not fully addressed by the services that were around, actually. So we've still got that. We've still got all of those issues of self-esteem, family issues, relationship issues, childhood trauma, that has all kind of been paused in terms of any support, but it's still there. But we've added into that the catastrophe of COVID, really, and we have frontline workers who haven't even been able to address the stresses of their mental health, by the work that they've done and the things that they've seen and experienced. So we've got some trauma work coming, I think. I think they haven't even been able to reflect on what that's been like for them, but I think there'll be reaction to that. There's going to be reaction to grief and loss that has not been able to be dealt with in usual ways. There's going to be anxiety, perhaps health anxiety, that was maybe already there but has risen because we all had to be careful of our health. Then there'll be people where that has become a very obsessive thing. And we've lived with fear and the fear of catastrophe now for quite some time, and that's pretty wearing for people to kind of survive with. So I think there'll be some relationships that will have become very toxic. Already having reports of higher levels of domestic violence. So I think that experience of relationships will have been often negative and stressful. Work stresses, working from home, these kind of stresses we would have presented to us in the past, but I think there'll be COVID-related kind of increase in that.
So you see a situation then where really there's a pent-up need for mental health?
Yeah, I think for mental health services it was already there, but I think it is waiting on us. I'm not sure if we'll see it immediately after lockdown finishes.
Yep.
That's just a hunch, is that people may think, well, this was, I'm feeling depressed or anxious because of this whole situation. And I think there might be a bounce back almost as we become freer, where we say, oh, well, that's now behind me. So I think there might be a lag. It might be the turn of the year before we start to see that people weren't able to get their resources back, weren't able to stabilise their mood and or make the changes that they wanted to post-lockdown, and that will be maybe when it comes to us. But that's just a hunch somehow that I have about it. It might be slow in coming to us, but I think it's there.
That might be particularly relevant for work environments where some people are going to be redundant, some people are going to be concerned about whether they're going to work from home or work in their normal territory. Yeah. And that might cause a series of issues.
Unknowns, and I think when we have unknowns, transitional times are really more difficult. Sometimes it's even a bad known is better than not knowing. I think that's just a human experience, is that transitions are difficult. So yeah, I think we've got a transitional phase coming up now in terms of work and other things too.
Given that wide range of issues that are likely to present, how do you think our counsellors will need to adapt or professionally address the issues?
I mean, I think as far as counsellors work, they have to stay resilient themselves and then enter into somebody else's pain, empathetically. So they always are able to be entering into someone's kind of frame of reference and experience, painful as that might be, but their own resilience needs to be strong enough for them to continually enter and re-enter that. So there's something in me as a manager that makes me think that the care of our counsellors will be important, because they too have been affected personally by the journey that they've taken through this. So, that seems important to be addressing the caregivers, valuing the caregivers, and supporting the caregivers going forward. They have the tools to work with what's coming to them, but they will be dealing with existential kind of crisis and catastrophe work, I think, for quite some time.
In terms of their method of counselling, face-to-face or use of this terrible thing, Zoom, do we need to perhaps think of different ways of tackling the problem in the way ahead?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback from the counsellors, there was hesitancy. This was not something that we did before. We were trained as face-to-face counsellors, and that was how there was a kind of set-up of how counselling is done. So there was a steep learning curve to learn how to counsel by Zoom or by telephone. The feedback that I'm having, whilst that was a fearful transition into that, the feedback is very positive, that the work is progressing and progressing well. Counsellors are commenting on the relational depth that they're finding, especially on telephone work, that has surprised them. And some of that is about maybe disclosures. There's a kind of disinhibition that happens online through Zoom, but also through telephone counselling, that can be something to be wary of, but also it can be something that actually really opens up the emotional depth and allows someone to explore difficulties more quickly maybe than before. But that needs to be well managed, and there's increased risk by doing that as well, so of kind of trauma being re-experienced. So yeah, there's some particular skills around that. I think we still have a number of clients who are hesitant about working by Zoom or telephone. And if we're staying in this situation for a bit longer, we've got to maybe try and help people to access and at least experiment with that as a way of getting their counselling, because suspending for a long time is now starting to really show up the strain of managing their own mental health issues, and yet whilst still being maybe a bit resistant. So yeah, I think there's some work to be done in helping people to try out some new things if they haven't already done that, and just taste and see whether they can get support in that way, rather than saying, well, I can't do it that way, or that won't help me. I think I'd like to see some of the people who have said no to that maybe just tasting and seeing, because the experience has been quite good, I think.
Yeah, the medical experts seem to say that people with general illnesses are being shy about coming into hospital and about opening up about their issues. And perhaps the same thing might happen with mental health issues.
Maybe.
They're in the background. They're waiting to explode.
Yes. And maybe I'd say in the last month or so that's starting to come to us a little more, where people on the waiting list are coming back and saying, look, I'm really struggling now. I know I said I would wait, but
Right.
I'm struggling. I think this latest phase has been a difficult one for people, where there's been some choice and it's been less clear for people how to transition through this phase, and that's brought its own stresses.
Okay. So one thing that, as far as Harbour Counselling is concerned, is not going to change, and that is that we're quite proud of our Christian heritage. And I know that Psalm 27 is today's theme, and that talks about light. And I sometimes feel that this is what we're trying to do in the Perth area.
Yeah.
There is some darkness there, and if we can shed some light into the darkness, that's what Christ would have us do.
Absolutely. And I think holding hope for people, within these situations, that's what we offer. Even when people can't hold hope for themselves, we will hold that, and hold hope that maybe even in these kind of times there are possibilities for growth, and possibilities of good things to come out of the challenges. And so yes, I think standing in the light and standing with hope is what we do, and we draw alongside others in their darkness to stand with that.
Very positive place to stop.
Yeah.